Hey, good people. Grits or cream of wheat? Who the hell is racist? Does anyone ever ask could they touch your hair?
Black Like Me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Black Like Me.
Hey, everyone. I want to welcome you back to another exciting segment of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. For many African Americans, there have been two major factors, well, three, that have helped us to succeed: community, faith, and education. What's increasingly taking place on campuses across the country is an intensified sense of segregation, racial stress, and just pressure on students of color. My daughter's a brilliant scholar. She was just offered 5-year funding for a PhD program in Italian and a 2-year full ride in library and informational sciences. But she has talked to me about the stress of isolation as a woman who is Black on UW-Madison campus. Her grandmother, my mother, is an alum, class of 19. Oh, don't tell my mom I said 18. Class of 1985. In May, I graduated. In December of 85, my wife graduated in 87. My sister graduated. So my daughter's really the third generation Badger. And of all the family members that have gone to Wisconsin, and we have probably 13 degrees from Wisconsin, she probably has the best grades. But yes, from 2014 to 2018, experience isolation and stress that my mother did not experience in 1970. I know you've been doing the math. She started in 70, dropped out to get married and raise her family. Then she came back to college with me and my sister. But my daughter experienced things recently on campus that weren't really taking place in the 1970s or in the early 80s when I was there. So I am grateful that there are people on campuses who have the title of Chief Diversity Officer. But there are some nuances to those titles. Today, I'm going to be talking with Patrick Sims, who is the Chief Diversity Officer for the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I love this campus. It's facing some challenges like many campuses across the country, where we're trying to wrestle with, whether or not affirmative action efforts to recruit students of color are constitutionally sound. Is this legal? Is this right? The Black Lives Movement is being talked about or resisted on campus, and so many other things. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation to talk about what does it mean to try to make a campus that is a pipeline for success and opportunity. How do we make sure that pipeline does not become clogged for certain students because of their race, gender, or ethnicity? And so you're going to want to sit back and listen to this gentleman talk about his work, the scope of his work, what he's hoping the outcome will be, and the critical nature of this role on campuses. Today, my guest is going to be Patrick J. Sims. He's a key player at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Diversity and Inclusion. He's a Chief Diversity Officer. He has a lot of responsibilities and a lot of weight on his shoulder. Mr. Sims, I'm so glad that you're here today, man. Welcome.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good.
You make me feel old, man. Call me Mr. Sims.
Come on, Mr. Sims. This is Patrick. Patrick, now what I do with my guests when they come on to kind of lighten things up is just to ask them a couple of black ice breakers.
Oh, I got you.
You got me? Okay.
I got you.
got
I'm
me.
ready for you.
You're ready. All right. Grits or cream of wheat growing up?
Grits.
Grits. Do your children eat grits?
No.
Don't tell me they eat cream of wheat.
No.
Okay, because I almost got upset. They are Fruity Pebbles?
No. We eat.
Oh, because your wife's a vegan, right?
Oatmeal.
Homemade. She grows it in the backyard, right?
Well, if she could, she would, but no.
That's right, because your wife served me some raw collard greens.
Yes, and
that were good.
You didn't know they were raw until I told
No,
you.
she somehow put vinegar or something on it. So that's right. So they don't eat grits. So okay, butter or sugar when you're eating them growing up?
Both.
Really?
Yeah.
So just both of them, butter and sugar.
Yeah.
Did you iron your blue jeans growing up? I'm checking because you're younger than I am. So were you in that era where blue jeans were ironed?
I didn't iron mine, but I had to iron my mother's. So
Your mom wore creased blue jeans?
Well, she worked third shift. And so part of my job was every night before she got ready for work, I had to iron her smock and her pants. And sometimes when she didn't have the blue pants she was supposed to wear as part of a uniform, she would rock the blue jeans. And I would have them bad boys creased. They could stand up by themselves.
I love it. That's what that magic sizing is for.
Right.
Shh. Oh, man. Okay, let me see. Did you ever yell at your mother growing up? Did you ever like yell and say, "Mom, I hate you"?
Oh no.
Did you ever tell your mother, "Get out Mom, get out of my room"?
Oh, I wouldn't have my teeth. So this is a true story. My mama, she might forget it, but my father passed when I was a sophomore, the beginning of my sophomore year, right, literally the Monday before Thanksgiving, 1994. And she was upset about something. And this puts it in context, so I think what you're getting at.
Sure.
Right? So she was upset about something, and we were dealing with the funeral. And so I have two older brothers. My oldest brother's 8 years older than I am. My other brother's 5 years older than I am. So we're all grown men. I was the youngest, so I was like 19, 20.
Mm-hmm.
And she was upset. And so the three of us were around the kitchen table, and she slapped the three of us like the Three Stooges.
When you were saying she slapped us, I got Curly, Larry, and Moe in my head before you said Three Stooges.
Yeah, well, she slapped the three of us like right down the road.
And what did you say? Knock, knock.
No. So we each had this instinctive response to jump. And, we were like, okay, we know she's grieving, but we grieving too. So why and her response to us, because she saw our response, our natural physical response, like we're going to do something. She said, the day I fed my children will be the day I kill them.
Oh, snap.
And then we were like, okay, Ma, come on, Ma. You ain't got to go. It's not that deep.
She said, don't even think about it.
Don't even think about it.
The day I fear my children is the day I'll... Wow.
Right. Now, that's old
Sure.
school. So the idea of yelling at my mother or saying anything that was even remotely representative of having an attitude
wasn't even an option.
It was always, yes, ma'am, yes.
It was. And as an adult, you're a dad, and you still better watch your tone.
Right. So I laugh because my son, Novian, he's going to be 10 this Friday.
Oh,
my
my goodness. I can't believe it.
I get on him the same way. I say, oh, God, I am my mother. Yes. I said, what did you say? He's like, huh? What'd you say? Yes. Okay. Yes,
because he better not say what. Oh. Novian, what? Right.
Now, I won't do him the way my mama did, but, I can still physically intimidate him a little bit. So, I'm milking that while I can before he grows up, and I got to look up to him.
Man, I love that. What was the strangest thing you did to your hair growing up? Did you have it braided, hot comb, permed, jerry curl?
Oh, we had a jerry curl early on.
You did?
We had a little jerry curl early on.
Really? And so did you have that that orange, what's that bottle called?
I don't know.
The moisturizer. Did you have
the one I had? It was
you had a sophisticated one, didn't you?
No. It was the bottle. It was a spray bottle. It was tan with a brown rim and brown writing, and it had a silhouette of a man and a woman, both with afros on it.
Yo, yes.
I don't know the brand, but people know what I'm talking about.
Man, how did you sleep in it? Did you have to wear a plastic bag over it so that you wouldn't get your pillow messed up?
I don't even remember. I just think.
But you had that jerry curl.
We had it, and it was like a hot minute. And I was like, nah, this ain't working.
This is not working. This is messy, man. This is messy. Do you know what Neapolitan ice cream is?
Yeah. Napoleon ice cream, we used to call it.
We used to call it Napoleon ice cream.
Yeah,
people did call it Napoleon because that's a strange word. Bring me some. Boy, when you go down to that corner store, bring me some of that Napoleon ice cream back.
Or you going to Taco Bell, give me some of Nacho Bell grated. Give me one of Nacho Bell grated.
Oh man. Do you have an aunt or a relative who, when they go to events, weddings, funerals, keep maybe aluminum or Ziploc bags in their purse so they can take a little plate home? Do you have relatives who did that?
No, that we don't. I do have an aunt who's an amazing cook, Aunt Claudia. She's phenomenal, and I guess the one scuttlebutt I could share, if you've ever seen the movie Harlem Nights,
yes,
the character that's Della Reese,
that character,
that's my Aunt Claudia.
Oh my goodness,
that's my Aunt Claudia.
Della Reese had me crying in that movie.
That's my Aunt Claudia. Will cuss you out and give you the shirt off her back.
Remember when she was somebody shooting that little gun? Was that Della Reese? She got her pinky, her baby.
Come on, shoot my pinky toe.
Shoot my pinky toe. I think that was Della Reese. Some of the old folks, some of the old church people got mad when they found out she was a preacher.
Right.
They're like, she was on Harlem Nights cussing like a sailor, but she made me cry. She was laughing so hard.
That's the beauty of being an actor, right? I mean, as someone who has a similar path to hers, I mean, I'm not a clergy person, but faith is a big part of my own experience, and as an actor, a classically trained actor, I mean, these are things that we wrestle with, and I'm a big believer that as artists, we think about the role that shamans played, particularly storytelling and healing and connecting with nature. For me, that's a wonderful parallel, being an artist and being able to step into places and inhabit experiences that others can't. And so what she was able to do with that role, to go to that space, to play that character, not judging it, but inhabiting that individual's full humanity. That's
another way
no
of
small
thinking
thing.
about it. And folks had a hard time doing it, because I think when people watch TV and movies, they thought that's who they were. So, like, okay, if Della Reese, was cussing about shooting her pinky, her baby pinky. What she call it, pinky toe?
Shoot my pinky toe off.
My pinky toe off. While we're on the subject of acting, I want to brag on you on a bit. So, although you hold down this role as the chief diversity officer, and you've got, a long, impressive title of that, but you're running, you've earned it. Being the deputy vice chancellor, and the LZ Higginbotham vice provost, and the first.
We think the first endowed CDO position in the country.
That's crazy, because you hear that in faculty department, like in departments, like there might be an endowed chair in theater and drama, but in administration, is amazing. So you're the first LZ Higginbotham vice provost, and that's amazing. So kudos to UW-Madison for that. But your background is acting. You studied drama at Yale. University. That's where you met your wife, the lovely Miss Petrolina. But you went to college out of Chicago, a South Side kid growing up in the hood in the community, and you go to Yale, meet your wife there, like I think during orientation or something like that, and then you completed your MFA at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee.
Professional theater training program. Okay, he did his homework.
Yes. And I just remember that actually just from knowing you over the years, and of course we know each other through Fountain of Life Church, where you and your family serve. But I remember when you were here, starting off as a drama professor. We talked. We went out for lunch at some restaurant on Park Street, and you told me you were working on your. You had just gotten tenured. I think we went out to eat, and you mentioned you just passed the whole tenure process and had been granted tenure, became an associate professor. You have to create the Theater for Cultural and Social Awareness.
Yes.
And that was impressive. Like you were managing this budget and the oversight of this project, and then you get tapped to become the interim. And I don't remember what the title was during those days.
It was just interim vice provost.
Vice provost for diversity.
Yep.
And then, did you think you were just going to be doing that for like a year and then go back to the drama department?
It was interesting. I always say, my whole journey, even to sit here in front of you today, I could walk it back to a testimony, right? Or sort of a point in life.
Sure.
Where if I didn't make the decision, I wouldn't be where I am today.
Definitely.
And I won't go through all of that, but I will simply say that, my predecessor, Dr. Damon Williams, is a brilliant guy. He shook up some things at the UW.
He did. I remember that.
Challenged the status quo. And when his time, it became clear he was nearing the extent to which he could actually affect the kind of change he wanted to see. They were looking for someone who could step in. And so I had already had relationships with every unit that was in the division at that time as Professor Sims. And so part of my role is we have now 7 diversity programs. At that time, we had 4 diversity pipeline programs: the People Program, Posse Program, First Wave, and the CO Program. Those were the programs that were in the unit at that time. And I had many of those students in my classrooms. So I was their professor.
Of course.
Right. I taught a course. We have a series of courses called the Ethnic Studies Requirement Courses, ESR. And so I taught those for my department. So I knew the students. And I also had a relationship with our Office for Equity and Diversity, because I was doing professional development training for all of our graduate students for the entire university. My Theater for Cultural and Social Awareness program was the conduit to provide that training for all, I think, some 3,000 or 6,000. I don't want to mess the number up, but it's a lot of graduate students that go through that program. These are required trainings in order for them to get their pay increases. So I was intimately involved in that work. So I had a hand already.
Wow.
In more than half of the unit.
Sure.
And so I remember getting a call where they said, the provost would like to talk to you. Now, mind you, I live in Sun Prairie. And it was around 2:40.
And Sun Prairie is a community that's right outside of Madison, Wisconsin.
Well, normally it's about a half. The reason why I share that, it's about a normal half-hour commute.
Sure.
They said, could you come and meet with the provost at 3 o'clock? Now, I was just hitting Sun Prairie, getting off the exit to go home. And I said, yes, I'll be there at 3 o'clock. Do you know I was at his office at 3 o'clock?
You got it right. And East Washington is not an easy street to navigate.
So long story short, we had a good conversation. And, I'll never forget the advice that he gave me. This was then Provost Paul DeLuca. He said, we need you to do more than just keep the wheels from coming off, right? We actually need you to do some things, make some changes that will set the unit up for success long term. He told me to fail and fail quickly.
Wow.
That was his advice to me.
That's some good leadership insight.
Yeah. And so I took that as the leverage I needed to go in and do the things that I did. Because, when you're interim,
Sure.
You walk this fine line of not trying to make people too upset or
because they might be the ones that vote for you to get the job permanently.
Yeah. And so I was in this odd space of having to do cleanup in essence, right, to address some longstanding challenges that had existed within the programs. And doing that for 2 years as interim was no small feat. And so that was part of the process that sort of put me on this path. So your question is, did I ever think I'd be doing this beyond 1 year or two? I knew I had at least 2 years in me.
Sure.
And I wanted to use those 2 years to beta test to see if this would be something that I would want to do long term. And sure enough, I wanted to make the commitment long term. And, it was an opportunity to leverage the work that I was already doing in the classroom with a larger platform.
So you were prepared for it from that perspective, at least with some of the key themes that a chief diversity officer would be addressing.
Right. Well, the irony in all of this is that I say I haven't brought my best foot forward. So I've
because this takes time.
Yeah, I've developed a whole different set of skill sets that I didn't anticipate I would have to focus on being in this role, let alone what I was intending to do was to bring my research in the theater, writing original materials based on real life scenarios and situations that would be a catalyst for what I think are the important conversations we need to have around what are referred to as sensitive subject matter. So race relations, sexual orientation, all of those hot button issues that everybody want to talk about, but we don't have those spaces to meaningfully engage in those kinds of discussions. I have yet to really activate that part of what I bring to bear as an administrator. But I've done a lot in terms of the organizational restructuring, the managing, and the people dynamics, which, that's a whole different set of skill sets and complications.
Is there an association across the country of for folks in your position, basically chief diversity officers?
Yeah, the National Association for Diversity Officers in Higher Education.
And is there one within the Big Ten?
We do have one, yep. The Big Ten Academic Alliance has the Senior Diversity Officers Council.
And you all meet from time to time?
We try to meet at least once a semester. In fact, I'm getting ready to go to a meeting with them. We'll be in Michigan, so we're changing some things up where each campus is going to host the group on site as opposed to going to our center that we have in northern Illinois.
As a black male, are you in the minority among the Big Ten colleagues?
Actually, no.
Really?
No.
We're seeing more black men being held.
You will see mostly black men, at least for the Big Ten. Now it's shifting. But for our group in particular,
that's interesting.
They're mostly black men.
Because I would imagine black, that they may have a plethora of black women in the role. So nationally, do you see? Are numbers of black women growing in this area nationally?
Yes, there are. But it's still interesting because it's a space. The body itself is still a relatively new phenomenon in higher ed.
Sure.
So when you think about diversity officers, I mean, the corporate sector, they've been there, done that.
Sure.
Right? And so they're now moving beyond the kinds of things that we're still wrestling with. In terms of counting heads and numbers and things like that, they're really zeroing in on the quality of the experience for the employees that they want to show up as part of their community. Sure. We're still wrestling with some of the things that relate to how many we have, so we're still counting heads.
Sure.
But that said, there's a wonderful mix of people from different backgrounds, and there's some debate as we also see more white women step into.
I was wondering
about
that. That's
roles.
actually I was going. Are you seeing?
Yeah.
Now is that a new move, or I've wondered if maybe the role started off as white women and shifted to more people of color, or are you seeing it maybe historically being people of color, but seeing more white women taking on?
Well, it started. So there's
as
always
white
been
men.
someone that's paid attention to the diversity space, but it's largely grown out of the student affairs space, right? So there's always been some individual, whether I don't know. Now I will say they're not necessarily in the C-suite. Like this is a new phenomenon, right? But there's always been someone that sort of mined the enterprise as relates to students. Very little attention outside of the provost office, which is, the provost is the person that kind of manages everything.
Right.
But that individual manages everything. So that person's ability to really zero in on this issue has always been constrained. But they've always known it's an issue that they need to address and pay attention to. So actually, again, my predecessor, Damon Williams, he was one of the architects of really putting the notion of a chief diversity officer in the higher ed space on the map and really socializing the idea and letting it take root. And you see it now proliferating throughout the country.
That's wow.
Yeah. So now the next level of proliferation is, okay, we have a chief diversity officer. Now there's more attention that's paid to what it means to be in the faculty and staff space, because those solutions look somewhat differently than the ones that you focus on students, but the challenges are the same.
Sure. You know what I'm finding, Patrick, is that for folks who are champions of justice, you're doing this in your role at the helm of the Diversity and Inclusion Initiative at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm working on things in our community and in our county. I'm finding that we have this we're having this very interesting balance where we're pushing for fairness and equality while still managing our own personal disappointment or concerns about if we're pulled over by the police. And so I'm not trying to create some sob story scenario, but tell me a little bit about, am I right that we've got to balance this? On one hand, we're believing that we can work closely together, but then we might have to go to school with our children and have to sort of correct a teacher and administrator and say, no, this is not how you're going to talk to my child, or no, this is not what you're going to say to them. People don't realize that that's a lot of work to manage your own personal expectation and then your professional expectation. I would
even take it a step further. So what you just described, if I think of a sequence, sort of step one is the responsibility of the role.
Sure.
There's a middle step between what I do as an administrator for the university and what I do as a father, right, and a husband.
Sure.
That middle step is contending with the people who are supposed to be on your team.
Yes.
Right? Because
come on, speak truth.
Many of us, the analogy I use, I say, I feel like I'm a secret agent, a double agent, but everybody knows I'm working for the other team. Right. So you think about the history of espionage, the whole point is to not have it, publicly known that you're working for the other side. Right. But everybody knows that I'm working for the other side.
It's hazard of the job if they find that out.
But, when you're dealing with the community that you're trying to serve and members of your team are part of the community, as are you, what most people fail to realize is while, you hear firsthand the horrors, the challenges that they experience, but what your team members or people on the inside who are your quote-unquote allies fail to acknowledge is that you wrestle with those same challenges too. So they divorce that piece from the power that they assume that you have. And so when you sit then in the other spaces where you are sort of the representative there and clear that you're trying to challenge the status quo, you have to choose your battles. You can't fight every fight. Otherwise, you'd be worn out before you know it.
Exactly.
And that takes great skill, mining and knowing when to speak up.
And energy.
Absolutely. So those three things, as the administrator, as the person who sits at the table with the quote unquote decision makers, knowing when to push out, knowing when to speak up, is an art form in and of itself. Knowing how to manage people who are in your corner, hearing their frustrations and concerns, while also being clear that at the end of the day, there's only so much that you can do because someone still has the final decision authority that doesn't rest with me. And then there are the part of it when you come home, right, where you got to deal with the crazy stuff that you hear your child is contending with at school.
Exactly.
So those are real dilemmas. So I'm very clear that being in this position, it has a shelf life. I mean, the average tenure of a CDO when I stepped in 2013, at that time, was 2.5 years.
Because of those three components. I mean, because of the weight of the work. Yeah. But you have to also balance it with home and the three things that you just said.
And if you think about just the types of conversations that are happening nationally, this issue at one point in time was not something that a president or a chancellor would lose his or her job over.
Right.
It now is.
Right. I was going to ask you how the role and the tone on campus have changed.
So if you're not...
We saw this as Mizzou, didn't we? Where I think the president lost his job because of the lack of response to some racial incidents.
Gave birth to the Black Lives Matter movement, right?
Yes.
That was part of that. But I will add even, Tennessee, I believe it was the University of Tennessee, their legislative body voted to redirect the funds from the counterpart in my office for that institution to reallocate those funds for 1 year because they were upset about a preferred name change policy that the institution had put forward. And this was, put forward to support individuals who identified as members of the LGBTQ plus community who wanted to be called a different name. And so that, in their mind, was a red line that was crossed. So they didn't gut the office outright. They simply redirected the funds for a year.
For a year.
Which meant that those positions, those jobs, they all
went away.
And they redirected the funds towards scholarships. So who's going to argue with that?
Wow.
Yeah.
So the game has certainly changed.
Yeah.
I'm curious from your perspective about how campus life has changed.
Yeah.
Particularly in a light of diversity. Let's look at it today. When you were in college, let's say for your undergrad at Yale, and then what you think campus life, particularly a public institution, might be like for Novian. I want to see if you think we're moving in a positive direction, or do we go back and forth in terms of racial climate and sensitivity?
You know the game Whack-A-Mole, right?
No, I don't.
You push something down on here, something else pops up someplace else. You push it down over here, it pops up. Sadly,
that's a good analogy.
That's the reality. So there's progress certainly made in this space.
Of course,
absolutely. I mean, the fact that I am even in the role at a C-suite position, being able to affect the administration and implementation of programming with the insight that I have. I mean, that's a growth space. So earlier I talked a little bit about how, it was largely done through student affairs. Now they're clear. You need somebody paying attention to this 24/7.
Right.
It's their full-time job. Where I think we've taken a few steps backwards actually has very little to do with the institution per se. It's society writ large.
That's what I want to get at. So you have to also,
because our students are coming in.
Right. You're receiving students who are being impacted by what's happening nationally or in their communities.
Not only are they impacted by the current phenomenon, right, where the discourse is so toxic, there's an active disconnect to the historical consequences that gave birth to the civil rights movement. So I grew up sitting at the feet of my grandmother and my grandfather. My grandfather had a 5th grade education. My grandmother had an 8th grade education. And so she would tell me stories about how my grandfather survived a lynching when she was pregnant with my aunt, and she called their bluff. It was a group of white men. They were in Hayti, Missouri.
That's where my family's from.
They came looking for someone who killed one of their brothers. I wrote a play about it called Look at Me Now. It was a tribute to my grandmother. But this group of white men came looking for this black man that killed one of their brothers. And, my grandmother, the reason why she told me this story, because I was I think I had to have been 4th grade. And this is Chicago Public Schools. I won't name the school. Right. But I just remember there was this one teacher who taught my 2 older brothers, and she was a known racist. I mean, it was very clear. It was understood. And there was this kid in the class. His name was Aaron. And they were arguing. He was doing something stupid. I was in a different class. We're lining up to go outside for recess. And I just remember looking in the classroom, and she was a short little thing, but she walked up and she insulted, berated, and talked about Aaron in a way that no adult should ever speak to a child. Right. Aaron hauled off and smacked her. Oh. Right. So he hit the teacher. Oh. And when he hit this teacher in this presence of, large, predominantly black classroom, all of us went up. So it was like anarchy, where students were tearing up the classroom, pushing desks aside, ripping stuff off the wall. Now, mind you, I'm not in this class. I'm on the outside looking in, getting ready to go outside for recess.
And you saw it happening.
I ran in and started doing it too.
Oh my goodness.
So my grandmother.
What you started tearing up papers and breaking crayons?
Yeah, just like, it was just like this. I don't know. It was a Lord of the Flies moment.
I was thinking about that.
It was a Lord of the Flies moment, and I just remember, like, being in this space, and then my mama, she was gonna kill me. Right. But my grandma said, "No, baby, let me talk to him." And that's when she told me the story of how my grandfather was almost lynched, and how she helped. She knew, she found the man hiding in bushes that the group were looking for. He was hiding in her bushes. But I remember her saying that they came around looking for him, and she told him, "Whoever you're looking for, he's not here. Go on somewhere." And mind you, she's like, 8 months pregnant. Right. They could have took her out. Right. But, she was a praying woman. And so she just, stood there defiantly. And, my grandfather, he was in the back chopping wood. So he comes out with an axe. It looked like it's about to go down. Right. My grandfather didn't know at the time that, she was hiding the man in the barn. And that story has stuck with me to this day. Sure. When I think about what she had to endure, and what my grandfather had to endure, and what Dr. James Cameron had to endure, the founder of America's Black Holocaust Museum. Right. I mean, those kinds of things have real personal resonance for me. Right. I'll just stick with my son, who's in some instances a generation removed from the students who are in the classrooms right now. Right. They don't have those connections. They don't have those stories to kind of anchor them it's ideological, it's philosophical. It's like, okay, yeah, that was kind of crappy, but I want what I want.
Right.
Not knowing that
that's a dangerous misstep.
Progress is part of the struggle. So your question, what's going to be different? It's hard to say what's going to be different. The only thing I can imagine, and I will say that I'm inspired by, is the idea that roles like mine will have some effect at creating a broader sense of community that everyone feels welcome, valued, and appreciated. That's no small feat. Because
no, it's not.
You can't. Like it's an aspirational goal. You can't make everyone feel
because what makes
appreciated.
one student feel appreciated might make another student feel
Absolutely.
unappreciated. What are you saying about my culture, my contribution?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I see what's that called, whack-a-mole?
Yeah.
I can see like while you settle one issue, it creates others. And again, like when people come into a major campus, like again the one you work on, and I'm a graduate of UW-Madison. My daughter just graduated last fall. She's starting grad school later this fall. My mom graduated, so we bleed Bucky. So we've got this connection. But people will sometimes say the student body, like this campus is insensitive. But people come to this campus from all over the world, not just all over all over Madison or Wisconsin, but the nation and the world, bringing some of those unchecked perspectives, and they all converge on the campus. And then you, in your role as a chief diversity officer, wanting to manage this, and then you can't control who's elected in Washington or who's in the state capitol, and who's influencing society, and then people look to you to fix everything. I mean, you're African American, but you're not the chief diversity officer for Black students, and so when there were some anti-Semitic things written, the Jewish community wanted to make sure their children were being protected.
Absolutely, and we were there to step up and support.
Sure, I remember that. Or when the Native American students felt attacked and were attacked, and just horrible things happening, around campus, you have to speak into that as well. So you have to be. So sometimes this role. In years past, and I'm thinking of when I worked on campus 20, 30 years ago, when people weren't watching it 24/7, thought of this as a cush role. This is anything but cush role. I mean, because when I try to catch you on the phone or sometimes, hey, I'm traveling here because you're raising money for programs, or you're talking to alumni for, and you're fundraising, or you're evaluating programs. I mean, you've got this wide portfolio of responsibilities. And again, it's anything but cush, because you can hold it to, you can hold it down, and in the election, can change the climate or the level of conversation on campus.
An event we can have. I mean, we're always one scenario away from a crisis situation.
Sure.
But I thank God that we haven't had anything that I would characterize as sort of crises that we'd have to address. I mean, I'm fortunately in a space where I'm focusing on cleanup and refinement and making things better. But that in itself is no small feat, right? Because that requires resources, that requires investment, that requires having strong partnerships. I'm very clear that
you mean you can't just push a button as a Black man and just make the campus climate better?
No.
Oh, okay. It takes money to do that.
Well, it takes partnerships, right?
Yes.
And relationships that go beyond. So it's twofold. It takes those things to go beyond the communities we're trying to serve, because the responsibility has to be everyone's responsibility. And I'll use this analogy. When the fires were ravaging the West Coast, right? Paradise, California, all the lifestyles of the rich and famous.
Right.
The analogy I use there is everyone suffered in that community. When it came time to try and identify solutions or put the fire out or get people to safety, you didn't leave that responsibility to only 10% of your population.
Right.
Everybody played a role. So in the context of engaging diversity, equity, inclusion, you can't leave that on the backs of those who have historically been disenfranchised or adversely impacted by how collectively the institution or society or the world, for that matter, has or hasn't engaged these issues. You need everybody at the table. So that's the way I'm talking about it, and it's resonating with people that, I need my white brothers and sisters in this conversation. I need you to own your stuff, just like, other communities have to own their stuff, because that goes both ways. And it doesn't mean that just because you're a person of color that you're automatically given some sort of carte blanche that, you can do certain things without repercussions and consequences.
Exactly. So that makes me think about this next question. When you and your colleagues come together, whether it's on a conference level or national level, and you talk among yourselves about, just as you share battle scars about the work, what are 2 or 3 things you all want your white counterparts who are also in the C-suite, vice chancellors, provosts, what are 3 things you want, particularly those who are white, to know about the work that you all do collectively?
Yeah. We're wrestling with the same challenges that the communities are wrestling with, right? So when racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever the ism is, takes place, we are on the receiving end of that too. And so some acknowledgement that has a cumulative effect.
Definitely.
Is always appreciated. And I think the extent to which we're focusing on meaningful change, having those moments where, because I know, leadership has many audiences that they have to contend with, more than the ones I have to contend with. And so, I had an opportunity to appreciate more what our chancellor wrestles with now that I sit at her table more pointedly. Some type of acknowledgement or understanding that you haven't lost sight or track of the issues that are germane to those historically marginalized or historically underrepresented communities. Because it's really easy to forget that sometimes.
Right. I tell people when they I just dropped a podcast a while ago about I'm tired of white people telling me how to protest. Because what I say to some of my white colleagues who don't like the way I respond to something is, when you punch your clock, and I know people are salaried, but I still like to use that terminology. When you finish and go home, this is work you can leave home. Once I finish talking about diversity issues, I'm looking in my rearview mirror, making sure I'm doing the speed limit. I get a receipt when I go into the store. I train my daughter on what to do when she's driving to Chicago alone, and what happens if she's stopped in a rural, dark area. So I remind them, although you're trying to coach me on how to respond, this is work for you. This is life for me. I'm paid for this conversation, but I pay to go and live what I got to live. I walk around my neighborhood. We're one of only 2 African Americans who have lived in that particular area, in that particular thing. But we have new people moving in all the time, and they don't know my name. I mean, they don't know my face. So I'm walking around, and sometimes when I'm walking, I just feel myself being extra cautious. Like if they're pulling their cars out, just go real wide. Don't look like I'm casing the joint. And I'm not trying to sound like I'm some conspiracy theorist and I think my white neighbors are out to get me. Well, that's not the case. But I'm thinking about a white woman taking her garbage out to the curb just as I'm doing my 6 a.m. walk. And she might not be used to seeing a black man doing a walk around that community. So I try to make sure I've got something on that's very descriptive so that they would think, no one's going to come here and case this joint wearing a Badger hat and a Badger jacket, because that's too identifiable.
Yeah, so I wrestle with this thing all the time.
That's what makes this so exhausting.
I laughed because when you said you make sure you always grab a receipt, I do the same thing. Because the last thing I need is somebody to accuse me of stealing something I didn't pay for it. That's the thought process.
I'm 55 years old and I'm still, do you need a bag? I need a bag or a receipt, because I cannot walk out the store.
I don't need nobody coming to me and say, can I check to make sure? Yes, here's the receipt.
Do you know what I fear? I fear shopping and that little doot goes when you walk out the department store like you didn't pay for something. So I don't want people to look up and say, ooh, Reverend G is a shoplifter.
Well, but I mean, those are, I would characterize those as coping strategies, right?
Yes.
Right, because for me,
that's why we got high blood pressure.
The dangers that I think people in my role, from my lived experience, contend with, and I acknowledge this publicly, there are times where, I get so good at coping, you, to a certain extent, become desensitized to what the issues and challenges are.
See, that's where it gets dangerous.
Yeah, because, it's nothing for me to be in a room full of 100 people, and I'm the only brown something in that space.
Right. We do that.
I'm accustomed to that, right? It used to bristle me, but it doesn't bristle me anymore. But those are real challenges for others who may come as new to the community, trying to figure out, where do you find a sense of community? So I'm always working on the solution. I try not to get bogged down in the challenges. I try to keep the thing moving, try to be, like Bruce Lee say, be like water.
Right. Flow.
Right. So I'm trying to go with the flow. But those coping mechanisms at some point catch up to you.
They do. Because
you forget, what am I coping about? Or you just become so doggone tired that you're fed up and the bottom just falls out.
And that's where, the medical school on your campus where you work is promoting a partnership with African-American entities in the community, because what we're finding is the stress that's related to those coping skills, the microaggressions that make those coping skills necessary are some of the social determinants of health for Black people, which means we catch things sooner than our white counterparts and die from them more quickly.
Right.
And so I think what people have got to understand, and again, we're not asking anybody, we're not getting on a soapbox, we're not asking anyone to feel sorry for us, but you're right. What we need our white counterparts to understand is we know that there's a lot on your plate, but we either have to use some coping mechanisms that might actually put our health at risk, or jeopardize the tenure of our roles, because we have to manage the personal and then the professional personas, and that's a lot that people have not properly measured.
Right.
That takes its toll.
And for us, again, I can name any of my colleagues throughout the Big Ten or anyone who's in this work. We do this because it stems from a sense of personal passion and commitment.
Of course.
Right.
It's like a calling.
Right. And it's not to suggest that others don't have that commitment.
No, I got you.
But,
that others are coming behind you.
Right.
And you're trying to better the experience for them. So that's what makes it more personal.
Yeah.
But all the while you're taking you're taking
the pot
hits.
shots inside and out. Yeah.
I remember a while back reading this piece by Kyle Korver, who plays for Utah Jazz. He's an NBA player, but talked about how silent white NBA players are. Because he said in his piece, right now I'm pretty visible as a white player. I'm getting some attention. But, after listening to several of my friends and watched what happened with Westbrook, with this interaction with fans, he said, how long can I go and ignore the fact that this is different for white players than it is for black players? I think it's going to get attention because they're not used to white players saying, look, I'm up close on this. Then he started talking about mass incarceration, drug arrest rates, mortality rates. I mean, he did his homework and broke it all down.
Right.
But it took him a while, but I think he acted on what you said you all would love for your white counterparts to know.
He owned his part of
it. He owned the part of it and
conversation.
said, this is different for them than it is for me. And we do need our counterparts to know that. Hey, I hope you're enjoying this segment of Black Like Me. I want to take this moment to tell you about something new that we're adding to the Black Like Me experience. I've added a Patreon page. Yeah, that's right. Patreon.com/BlackLikeMe. It allows me to really connect with the listeners more. As I've been traveling the last few months, I am meeting so many strangers who are telling me how this show is having an impact not only on their personal perspectives and lives, but their professional lives. And that means a lot to me. So we've created a number of tiers, and I think you'll like this. Cream of wheat, grits with salt level, grits with sugar, grits with shrimp and cheese, a black icebreaker level. They give folks a variety of choices depending upon what you can afford. But what it allows me to do, depending on the level, where I will shout out your name on one of the shows. Another level allows us to have quarterly interactions on a private Facebook page. And there's another level that allows me to FaceTime with listeners individually to talk to you about what's going on in my world and in the studio and what's coming up. It's really exciting. We've been able to offer a great show to you for the past 2 years, and we want to maintain that level of professionalism while adding a few new things that I can't quite tell you yet. But please go to patreon.com/BlackLikeMe and help us take this show to another level. Let me deviate for just a moment. We've got a few minutes left. People are always talking to you about diversity issues and university issues. First of all, I just want to say I admire you for your work, and I appreciate the work that you do. I appreciate the fact that you also stay connected in the community, because the University of Wisconsin is a big machine. I used to work for it, and if you're not from here, you have to really work to build connections outside of the university. You have to cross University Avenue, particularly if you're an ethnic minority, to connect with your community. So I appreciate the fact that you've done that and continue to do that. But I'm just curious, as a young man growing up in Chicago, did you know as a young kid you wanted to be an actor? Were you interested in business or teaching? When you were 12 or 13, what did you see yourself becoming?
That's a great question. I think I wanted to be so many things. Part of me wanted to be a psychologist. Part of me knew I had an affinity for performance. Like I said, I had 2 older brothers, so my mom worked third shift. So coming home from school, she would be in bed and my brothers would be off doing whatever they were doing. So it was just me, myself, and I a lot of time, right? So I found great pleasure in watching my cartoons and making my own stories or telling those stories and doing all kind of different voices. So I have all these interests, but I knew I wanted to. When things began to crystallize for me was when we moved from the south side of Chicago. We moved further south to a suburb, and we were the first black family in that neighborhood. And I had no choice but to sort of hunker down and get in my books and just focus on me. And I remember my next door neighbor was the president of the Riverdale Improvement Association.
Oh, my.
And my mama didn't tell me this at first, but she told me this much later, where our next door neighbor basically said when we moved in, it's like, you're really not welcomed here, but we'll do everything we can to try and help you. And it was just kind of like a matter of fact, right?
Just thought you should know.
Right. And didn't know it at that time, but as I grew older, we became close. When my mom said, hey, you out there raking the leaves? Rake their leaves too. They were an older couple. When you're out there shoveling the snow, shovel their snow too.
Wow.
Be a good neighbor. And
that is how we were taught. A lot of us
over
were taught that
time,
way.
I became a surrogate son to that woman.
Wow.
And, when I hit college level and now I'm going off to Yale and, I'm doing all this stuff, she sent better care packages to me when I was in school than my mama did.
Wow, really?
And she wanted to meet the fiance when I was, hey, I'm getting married.
Wow.
So all we did was live next door to each other. So I've always wanted to figure out what was it about our experiences the day before we moved in and the day when, I sat down and introduced my fiance to her as a woman who was an important part of my life. And not knowing then at that time still, my mama didn't tell me this until much later, that was how she saw us. But I was always mindful that on some level we were an annoyance to her because I was always bouncing the basketball right side of the front window. And I was always running on the grass. So she would kind of, get off my grass, do those kinds of things. But we would make up for it in other ways.
Man. Do you remember the first play you acted in?
Yes.
At school? Was it elementary level, high school?
No, it was high school. It was a play called A Star Ain't Nothing But a Hole in Heaven.
What?
By Marsha Norman. And the role I played, this is what put me on the path to theater, actually. The role I played was a character that was originally written for a young lady, Jaretta Washington. Mm-hmm. She was the main protagonist's best friend.
Sure.
And the young lady that was in the play, Illinois has this competition play that they do every year. Mm-hmm. And we had a number of, the school I went to was highly respected and known, won state championships many times. So this young lady who was playing that support role was a diva. She was a child actor. And so the upperclassmen, the seniors were like, you need to get rid of her. She ain't no that. So they had this long discussion about, okay, well, who are we going to put in the role? And my teacher, my freshman speech teacher, John Cash, said, well, I got this kid. It's a guy, though. Like, you might be able to change the role and make it a guy and make that be the best friend. And so they took creative license and turned the character into Jory Washington, and I was her best friend. And we were poised to win the state championship that year, but we were disqualified because we ran over time by 3 seconds.
By 3 seconds.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So that's when you knew you
that
had the chops.
That was when I was like, okay.
And that's when others knew.
Yeah.
And that was in high school.
Yeah, it was my freshman year in high school. I quit the track team and everything.
So between then and graduation, you knew you wanted to go and study drama.
Mm-hmm. Now, my backup plan was I wanted to do chemical engineering because I was also into sciences a lot, and I had a pretty good science preparation. So I remember coming into college thinking I want to double major in chemistry and theater, and I remember going to the professor asking, this is what I want to do. And he's like, I don't think anybody's ever done that with any amount of success. Right. And I just remember praying for a C with an 89 average in that course, the Chem 115 the Weeder course.
Oh,
praying for a C with an 89 average. I was like, well, I'm working too hard for this. So I just remember calling my mom and saying, hey, Ma, I don't think I want to do the chemistry thing anymore. I want to do theater. And she said, well, baby, do whatever makes you happy.
Wow. So you got that support to do that.
Yeah.
I got a chance to see you act. It was a one-man play. Mm-hmm. What was that called? Was it called 10?
10 Perfect, a lynching survivor story.
And you played how many different characters?
18 characters.
18. And sitting in the audience, you knew each character because either something you put on or the way you walked or the way you that's what I realized. Like, I know you as a friend, as a person who's in our church. You've served in leadership roles, but that's when I saw you on a stage. I could not believe it. Was like I was watching Sally Field being Sybil. It's like I could see all these personalities. I mean, the distinction between them was really incredible. Do you miss acting? Because I remember I used to talk to you, and you would say, "Oh, I'm heading up to Portland or someplace to do a Shakespeare concert, not a Shakespeare concert, or showing or something." Or there were times you'd be in Japan doing things.
Yep.
Do you miss acting? And I was going to try to mess with you and ask the acting prepare you for your work, but I'm not going to do that because your colleagues are going to listen to this. But do you miss performing?
I act every day.
That's what I'm going to ask. No. Do you miss being on the stage and performing?
I do. There are parts of it. I do miss the stage. But, every actor has a natural journey in his or her progression.
Right.
So you see a lot of actors that will start off, killing it in front of the camera or on stage. And at some point, because that takes a toll on the body. I mean, the actor's instrument is literally his or her body. And so you then realize, okay, I want other things in life. I'm tired of living out of a suitcase. I have a close friend of mine from high school who was on the tour for Book of Mormon. And, he was ready to quit the tour. He'd been in with it for 2 years and said, well, the last 6 months of the tour are going to be in Hawaii. He was like, okay, I'll stay on.
Right. I can do it.
Right. But he has literally lived out of a suitcase and a trunk for 2 years.
Wow.
Right. And so there's no sense of community, no sense of home or ownership, or you're always with that motley crew of people that are showing up and doing the show for 4 or 5 days, and then you're going someplace else and doing that. So that takes its toll as an actor. And so you want more stability. And so you'll find a lot of us that will transition to directing, that will transition to writing. I've always done a lot of writing. And so you continue to refine those skill sets. And so I've already made that transition, although part of me still wants to. The role I haven't played yet that I still want to play. I still want to play Walter Lee, A Raisin in the Sun. I still want to play Walter Lee.
I hope you get to do it.
I hope so too. I get to play Walter Lee. But I'm at that point now where it's like, you know what? Let me write some stuff.
Sure. So you still stay in the arena, but you do different things. When you watch movies that are coming out today, or let's just say just general primetime television, there are people who are just newly discovered. They've come from maybe a reality show and they move into a sitcom. I won't really count them because I don't consider them actors. But who, like on a national silver on an international silver screen level, do you look at and say that's a good actor? I won't ask you who's bad, but like people like names I would know. Like who would you say?
That are really so for me.
Is Denzel Washington good?
Oh, he's absolutely good. But Denzel.
I'm not going to ask you any others because that was risky.
Is Denzel. I mean, so he's at the iconic status where he's transcendent, right? So Denzel is Denzel. He's going to be good at whatever. But you will always know Denzel is Denzel and whatever he does.
But who do you look at and say, wow, they're either trained or they're a quick study. Right. They're good. Who do you look at?
So I really appreciate Jeffrey Wright as an actor, the brother who played
Big Dog,
Martin Luther King.
Yes,
so there was an HBO series.
Sure. He played Top Dog.
Yeah, Top Dog, Underdog, right.
Underdog.
Yeah.
I saw him do that on Broadway.
Him and Mos Def, amazing.
Sure.
So I really appreciate his
good
artistry because he transforms.
Sure.
Right? And for me, that's what I like to look at, an actor who's like, wait, what? That was another good actor, Ed Norton.
I love Ed Norton.
So if you've ever seen American History X.
That's when I started liking his acting.
Right. I was like, that's the same guy?
Yes. Because he usually plays sort of goofy, sort of rom-coms. He was pretty impressive in that. How about
Sandra Oh is another amazing actor.
From Grey's Anatomy? Yes, she is good.
She's very talented. So, I mean.
What about Angela Bassett?
Oh, Angela. I mean,
she's from Yale. So she's from your alma mater. She studied drama at Yale too, didn't she?
Yes, she was. So of course, she's also, I would say, those are those iconic status, types. The Denzel Washingtons, the Angela Bassett's,
sure.
The Sidney Poitiers. Those go without saying.
Sure.
But the people who I think are just tearing it up, and if you're not careful, you might miss some things, are the Ed Nortons, the Jeffrey Wrights. I forget the brother's name, but if you saw Moonlight, I think his name is Andre. I forget the actor's name, but he was the one.
Was he the one working in the diner at the end of the movie?
Yes. I
can't think of his name.
Yeah, so he wasn't the main character that was going through the transition, but he was the potential interest for that character. He's another amazing actor that transforms. So there's some really good talent out there that. Just like, okay, they're doing it.
Oh my! Is there a play on Broadway that you're just saying, you and Petrolina have got to catch? There's some.
So I got all kinds of friends in Hamilton that haven't seen it yet.
I haven't seen it yet either. So when you get some tickets,
it's supposed to be coming to Madison.
That's right, next year, 2020.
Yeah.
So we might have to catch it.
Yeah.
Here.
So I
want to catch that.
I would love to see Hamilton. Listen to the soundtrack. Appreciate that work. Yeah, I mean,
Sure.
they're all kinds. So I'm not as well versed as I used to be.
Sure.
Because I'm busy putting out and jumping through other hoops.
That's right. That's right. You're doing some other. You're orchestrating another production.
Right.
Listen, you all. Today, my exciting guest has been Patrick J. Sims, the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He is the Elsie Higginbotham Vice Provost, and he was named to that position just last fall. And he's doing some tremendous things to help all students have a good experience, should they choose to, on a campus like UW-Madison. But I appreciate that tireless work and the diversity initiatives that you oversee. I just really appreciate it. And I think the piece that you really brought home for me and for our listeners is the tension between your own lived experience and then wanting to make sure that others don't have those experiences and wanting your white colleagues to understand that. And many of our listeners are white, and I think that this will be very helpful for them as they're considering their counterparts who are people of color and thinking about what they experience on their way to work and what they experience at work and after they leave work. I think that that's really, really important. So best of wishes to you. I appreciate the initiatives that you have going on campus. Glad to hear you're at the Chancellor's table because you bring some added perspective and connection, which I think is just going to help UW-Madison's plan. And so thank you for stopping by the studios to be part of Black Like Me. It means a lot to me. So have a good day.
Thank you. You too.
I want to thank Corey Saffold and Marcus Fleming for creating the music for this podcast. My podcast manager, Tyler Nyland. My engineer, Eli Steenlich. My editor, Jeremy Holliday. And our intro and outro are recorded by Cynthia Woodland. And a special thank you to WORT Studios, where we record Black Like Me.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at www.alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.
Black like me.